The MLB trade deadline has come and gone, and some of the biggest moves were made by the Padres, Blue Jays, and Marlins, while the Yankees, Dodgers, and Astros remained largely quiet. Mike Clevenger is now in San Diego, Lance Lynn remains in Texas. And history for Jacob deGrom, Max Fried, and Shane Bieber and their most recent performances. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Tuesday, September 1st, post-trade deadline special edition of Around the Bases here from 110 Sports, live streaming on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. And thanks for bearing with some technical issues here, getting on the air a little bit late this morning, having some server problems, but we are up and running on today's show. A lot to talk about here on the broadcast today. If you expected a quiet trade deadline, well, you would have been surprised by the amount of action we saw leading up to yesterday's 4 Eastern trade deadline. Not a ton of blockbusters per se, only a couple of like really big trades, but a number of medium-sized trades, if you will, that could certainly have an impact. The margins are small with this number of the number of teams making the playoffs that we're going to have this year being 16, with the number of teams that are still in it. Small additions can make a big impact come the postseason, and as far as getting to the postseason in the first place. And interesting to note some of the teams that made deals and some of the teams that stayed out of it, as I mentioned there just a moment ago. We'll discuss that coming up. So a lot to get to today on this show. Here's what you can expect on the broadcast today. We're going to start off by going through trade deadline winners and losers. A good way to break this down, I mean, it's not as simple as necessarily as, all these teams are, played the deadline perfectly and all these teams failed miserably. But it's a good way to break things down, how things played out, what teams made, notable moves to address key needs, and what teams had key needs and didn't address them at all. And maybe they're hoping on internal options. We'll talk about that coming up. Then we'll get into some recent standouts. Not a typical segment. It's not very creatively named, but there's just a number of key players from Jacob deGrom, Max Fried, Shane Bieber, Juan Soto, and others who have been doing incredible things lately who I want to highlight. Then we'll dive into our news and notes for the day. So no top 4 today because we're going to dedicate a lot of time here at the top to the trade deadline. Go through recent standouts, news and notes, and then as always on Tuesday, we'll go through our power ranking spotlight. Abbreviated version of that today because we're going to spend so much time talking about the deadline, of course, and also the trade deadline having a big impact in some cases on the bigger picture. So we'll discuss a lot of teams when it comes to the trade deadline. In our power ranking spotlight, we'll highlight a couple of other teams who didn't get a lot of trade attention, who are rising and falling in the power rankings, and and what that all means moving forward. So let's go ahead and dive right in to a discussion about the trade deadline, because there was a lot to talk about. There's a lot to break down, and it was an interesting trade deadline, to say the least. We did not see the Yankees go out and make a big move, the Dodgers go out and make a big move. Nothing big from the Astros or the Braves. The Cubs made some moves, but none of them were huge. So you might think just from that it wasn't an eventful trade deadline, but you'd be wrong, because we had some big moves. The Padres, the biggest of them, the Padres are all in, and we'll talk about them here in just a minute. One overall thought from the trade deadline is that it seems like teams that have found themselves with a strong shot of making the playoffs for the first time in years appeared eager to make deals. So we're talking about the Padres and the Marlins, the Blue Jays. These are not regular playoff contenders year after year of late. And they were willing to make deals. They're like, let's go for it. We've got a shot here to do something we don't often do and make the postseason and advance to the postseason. So they're going for it much more so than some of the long-standing contenders who are having success year in and year out. Those Astros, Dodgers, Yankees, they've got talented rosters already. They've going to be winning and have talented rosters for years to come. And it seemed like they took a more risk-averse approach to the trade deadline. There's some comments, and we'll talk about the Yankees coming up, from their general manager, that they just wasn't anything they thought was fair. There weren't any fair offers out there on the table, is what the Yankees general manager Brian Cashman said. So it seemed like some of the teams that you might expect to be the big, the big players in the trade market, they, knowing the nature of this season, and they were like, let's, we've got a great team. We don't want to we don't want to put risk too much of future performance from prospects and whatnot for, in many cases, a rental player. So let's go ahead and dive in. An article I have up on 110sportsmedia.com right now, breaking down the winners and the losers of the trade deadline. And I have 5 of each, and we're going to go through them now here on the show, and then we're going to highlight a couple of other notable deals as well. Heading into today, I actually thought about going into each big trade and sort of trying to categorize and say this trade happened and this trade happened, but that didn't seem like a great way of breaking things down. And it turns out that pretty much everything I really feel like is important to talk about fits into the realm of these 10 teams that I highlighted for this article that we're going to talk about now. There's a couple others, including the Marlins, I want to highlight after, so we'll talk about that coming up. But let's start with the winners, my winners of the trade deadline. And, winners and losers, it makes it seem so simple. And, it doesn't mean that every team on here, on this list of these 5, gets an A+ for their trade deadline performances. Doesn't mean things can't go wrong. Doesn't mean they didn't take risks. But these are just some teams that, in general, were aggressive in the trade deadline, had needs, went after players to fill those needs, and I think generally did a pretty good job of filling those needs. So we're going to start with the Padres. The Padres are the clear consensus in the baseball world as the biggest winners of the trade deadline, and it's certainly a well-earned honor. I have them as my biggest winner as well. San Diego was not only the most active team in the days leading up to the trade deadline, but also, I think, pretty clearly the most successful, and those are two things that don't always go together. General manager A.J. Preller, he's known for being pretty aggressive. He's not afraid to make a deal. He swung 6 different deals, which involved a total of 26 players in the days leading up to the trade deadline, addressing a number of key areas of need. In total, 10 different players, one of them is a player to be named later, were added by the Padres. The headliner, of course, the biggest name dealt at this trade deadline, Mike Clevenger, one of the top pitchers in the American League for the past several seasons, one of the top pitchers in baseball, period. He was acquired in a 9-player blockbuster with the Indians yesterday on deadline day and immediately takes over as the ace of the Padres staff. The team also bolstering its group at the catching position with the additions of Austin Nola, who has been really, really good. It's a name you may not have heard of, but he's been really good with the Mariners, and veteran Jason Castro of the Angels. They also acquired a potent bat in the lineup in the form of Mitch Moreland, first baseman for the Red Sox. Of course, they have Eric Hosmer, but they have that DH spot as well, so they can use Moreland in there a lot. And they strengthened the back end of their bullpen with the addition of Trevor Rosenthal from the Royals. Now, all these deals certainly came at a cost. The team gave up nearly a third of its top 30 prospects, according to Baseball America, in the deals. So there is absolutely some risk there. But that's a risk that it makes sense to take when you have this opportunity to compete that the Padres do this year. They've got the talent. There's plenty of reasons for optimism, and they also have one of the best farm systems in baseball. And despite trading all those top prospects, a number of top prospects there, they held on to the majority of their top 10, and I believe like all their top 4 prospects. So they're not exactly having problems in that area as well. There's still a great farm system even with those losses, and this is something that absolutely makes all the sense in the world for them to do. As far as the deals, individually, Moreland, a big bat in that lineup. He's a veteran presence. He's not, going to set the world on fire, but he's having a great season. He hits righties really well, so I imagine he'll be in the lineup most days for the Padres. Clevenger, of course, that's the big one. Immediately steps up as the ace of this staff. They have Chris Paddock, Dinelson Lamet, some very high-profile starting pitching prospects. So this is going to be a rotation that could be really good for the next couple of years. Clevenger at the top of it. He's under team control for a few more years after 2020. So that's huge for the Padres. I mean, they had an interesting. They have a number of interesting arms already, but adding Clevenger at the top of that rotation as that game one starter in a playoff series is massive. That's massive for this team. Trevor Rosenthal, as I said, added to bolster the back end of the pen. They've got Drew Pomerantz back from the injured list now. This is a team that's going to be so fun to watch. They are World Series contenders right now. As far as the caliber of team that they are, there's no doubt in my mind that this is a team that is capable of going to and winning the World Series. Will it happen? Of course, who knows? There are a lot of great teams, but including in their own division with the Dodgers, but this is an outstanding team that just got better, exciting. It's going to be fun to watch the rest of the way. Another winner for me at the trade deadline is the Toronto Blue Jays. And their deals have not received quite as much attention as the Padres deals, pardon me, and because they didn't acquire anybody as flashy as Clevenger. But the Blue Jays deals have the potential to be really impactful. The team made a total of 5 different trades during in advance of the trade deadline. On the offensive end, Toronto added first baseman and designated hitter Daniel Vogelbach from Seattle, and the versatile Jonathan Villar from Miami. He's MLB's steals leader, and he figures to play an important role on this team on the infield for the next couple of weeks as Bo Bichette works his way back from injury. So that's a sneaky good addition right there. Villar's been pretty good. He's he's not incredible or anything, but he's a guy who has real talent, can swipe some bags, real athleticism for this team, and it certainly makes sense in the now context as well. But the most important needle-moving upgrades for the Blue Jays were undoubtedly in the rotation, and none of the 3 players they added are, superstars. None of them is assured to be a great performer moving forward, but they took some low-risk moves that could potentially pay off in a big way. Robbie Ray from Arizona certainly fits that mold. The former All-Star in the last 5 seasons entering this year had posted an ERA of 3.96. He consistently strikes out more than a batter per inning. Control issues have been a huge problem this year. He's walking a batter per inning this season. So there's a real concern there, and maybe he doesn't get it turned around, but there's certainly talent there that can be tapped into, and if he can get it turned around, that could be a huge addition for the Blue Jays. Taijuan Walker, acquired from Seattle, Ross Stripling from the Dodgers, and the Dodgers only traded the deadline. They're far from superstars either, but they're clear upgrades in a rotation that had some significant holes behind Hyunjin Ryu at the top. So it certainly makes sense for the Blue Jays. They're not adding all-star, they're not adding superstar pitchers here, but these are 3 players who, look, even if 1 or 2 of them hits in a big way, then it's pretty clear upgrades for the Blue Jays, and they didn't have to give up a ton to get them. So a job well done overall for the Blue Jays. Again, for the types of deals that they made complete sense. And for not spending a ton in terms of prospects and money, they made complete sense for where the Blue Jays are right now. And this is a talented team, another team I'm really excited to watch down the stretch. A couple other winners for you, and we'll go through these a bit quicker. The Philadelphia Phillies, and they had the biggest area of need of a potential contender. Let me rephrase that. They had the clearest need of a potential contender in baseball, in my opinion, in the bullpen, heading into trade season. It's simply been a nightmare this season. Heading into play on August 21st, Phillies relievers had posted a league-worst 8.07 ERA, just horrendous. The team then proceeded to add veteran relievers Brandon Workman and Heath Hembry from the Red Sox about a week ago, and then they snagged David Phelps, veteran reliever, in a deal with Milwaukee. He's familiar with current Phillies manager Joe Girardi, who he played under for 3 seasons with the Yankees, and he's been off to a great start this season. So they haven't transformed their bullpen from worst to first by any means, but these upgrades do help this team in a big way. There was a clear need for the Phillies in adding to the bullpen, and they did just that. Some veteran arms that can hopefully help stabilize things. This is a really talented team. Bryce Harper, he's underrated. He's having a great season. People just don't really talk about him. JT Realmuto is the best catcher in baseball right now. they've got an incredible amount of talent. So hopefully this helps stabilize things for the Phillies. So I consider them a winner as well. Not on the caliber of San Diego and Toronto, but a winner nonetheless. Same for the Reds. The Reds, the results just haven't been there for them this year. And this is a team that I picked to win the National League Central, so I was certainly optimistic. And they're still, again, this is another team, an incredible amount of talent. They've got two Cy Young frontrunners in Trevor Bauer and Sonny Gray. And they made some big offensive additions in Mike Moustakas and Nick Castellanos. They've got Eugenio Suarez and Joey Votto's still there. And there's an incredible amount of talent on this Reds team, particularly in the starting rotation. So I'm glad to see the Reds also believing that they still have a shot at capturing at least a wild card spot. And so they made two notable moves prior to yesterday's deadline, acquiring veteran reliever Archie Bradley from the Diamondbacks and outfielder Brian Goodwin from the Angels. Bradley hasn't been particularly great this year, but the numbers are a little bit deceiving. His FIP, which is his fielding independent pitching metric, which is an ERA estimator, is 2.01. So really he's pitched pretty well. The results haven't quite been there. But he's been one of the best late inning relievers in the National League in recent years. He had 32 saves last year. So that's a big addition to the back end of a Reds bullpen that has struggled. Goodwin, meanwhile, he's capable of playing all three outfield spots, and he's having a pretty good year. 4 homers, 7 doubles, 17 RBI for the Angels. Not a huge impact bat, which you could argue that they needed because that offense has really struggled. But there's also some players there that hopefully will turn things around, like Mike Moustakas moving forward. So Reds going for it, putting in some real effort there with Archie Bradley. That's a big addition, and Brian Goodwin's not nothing. So certainly like to see what the Reds did there. I have to declare them a winner as well. And finally, the Oakland Athletics are my 5th winner. They entered trade deadline day with the second best record in the American League, and they look like legitimate World Series contenders. They didn't necessarily have to do anything big, and they didn't, but they did get 2 2019 All-Stars at a pretty cheap cost in acquiring Tommy La Stella, the veteran infielder from the Angels, and veteran starting pitcher Mike Minor from the Rangers. La Stella is an impending free agent. He's having a good season. He's hitting 265. His on-base percentage north of 360, 4 homers, 8 doubles, 15 RBI. 31-year-old seems like a really good fit with Oakland. He makes contact at a high rate. He rarely strikes out. He can slot in at second base, which has been the A's biggest offensive hole. Minor hasn't pitched well this season. The veteran struggled, but he's coming off a resurgent 2019 in which he had 200 strikeouts and 208 frames with about a 3.6 ERA. The veteran right-hander also coming off veteran left-hander rather, coming off of 6 shutout innings against the Dodgers. Neither of those moves are huge needle movers, but significant nonetheless. Some depth for that A's rotation that's struggled a bit this year, had some underperformers, and filling a clear need at second base. So the A's a winner for me as well. So now that we talked about some of the winners of the trade deadline, in my opinion, let's briefly go over some of the losers, in my opinion. The biggest one here, this is also a pretty clear consensus from what people are talking about, what I've seen online, similar stories to what I wrote in topics like we're discussing now. The Texas Rangers, pretty clearly the biggest losers of the trade deadline. They certainly don't feel that way as far as what their general manager and is being said following the trade deadline. They don't feel like they missed out in a big way. But the Rangers are the first of a trend with these teams here that I'm going to talk about, of players who are losers because not of actions that they made that were horrible, trades that I think they blew, but rather the inaction. And that's what 4 of these 5 losers are on this list for, is inaction. And the Rangers certainly fit that mold more than any other team. I don't really think there was a bigger surprise at heading into yesterday's deadline than the fact that Lance Lynn stayed put in Texas. Aside from Clevenger, Lynn was the most coveted player on the market, it seemed. Yet despite the need for pitching, starting pitching in particular from contenders throughout baseball, and the Rangers' essentially non-existent chances of competing for a postseason spot, of actually getting a postseason spot, Lynn curiously stayed put at the deadline. And there are a few, further reasons why it seemed unwise for the Rangers to keep Lynn. For one, the team's clearly not afraid to sell off pieces. They sent infielder Todd Frazier and catcher Robinson Chirinos to the Mets. Minor sent to Oakland, as we mentioned. So clearly it's not as if they're sitting here and say, they brought in pieces and they said, oh, we still think we can make a run at it. Clearly, no, they're selling. They know they're not making the playoffs this year. And the values of Lance Lynn and Joey Gallo, the team's top hitter and top pitcher, and Lynn and Gallo, are never going to be higher than they are right now. So it would make sense to trade them now because, in addition, they aren't likely to contend next year either, which is the final year of Lynn's contract. And there's little star power on that roster besides Lynn and Gallo. So given the circumstances here, it seems like it was clearly a pretty head-scratching trade deadline for the Rangers. I have them as a loser here. It made sense for them to trade away some pieces like Todd Frazier, Chirinos, Mike Minor, but not trading Lance Lynn seems like a mistake. There's been some talk they might send him, maybe they'll approach him and go into negotiations in the offseason about a potential contract extension, but given the Rangers situation right now and the value of Lynn being at what it is, he's been incredible this year. It just didn't make a lot of sense that they didn't trade him. Another loser at the trade deadline, and this is the one that breaks the mold because it is about actually a trade rather than inaction. And it's also my most controversial loser, I would say, and that's the Cleveland Indians. And I've seen a number of different takes on the Indians. This is all related to the team's return from San Diego for Mike Clevenger, as well as them trading away outfielder Greg Allen and a player to be named later in that deal. And I've seen similar lists and conversations of people saying that the Indians are winners, and I've seen them saying the Indians are losers, and I've seen people saying the Indians are that neutral, I don't know, we'll see, I guess this was fair area. And there's no doubting that Clevenger is one of the best pitchers in baseball, as we talked about. And them trading him away, they still have a shot at contention this year, of course. They're still very much in contention. A shot at making the playoff spot the playoffs is absolutely there for the Indians. Despite trading away Clevenger, they've got an incredible pitching staff, even without him. But he's one of the best pitchers in the game. And I don't think the haul that they got for him was enough. Now, they got a large quantity of highly regarded prospects from the Padres, but I don't think they really got a star. They did not get a really highly regarded prospect for a pitcher who's one of the best in baseball under team control through 2022. And I don't want to be too hard on the Indians. This could end up working out. They got some intriguing starting pitchers. They got an outfielder who could help them now in Josh Naylor, at least a little bit, although I'm not super high on him. But emerging is a really clear pattern with Cleveland. They keep developing these incredible arms, and they got some great arms from the Padres. But they're kind of developing these great arms year after year, and then they're trading one of them away for a return that doesn't really help the team win now. I mean, first it was Corey Kluber, then Trevor Bauer, now Mike Clevenger. They keep trading away these star pitchers. They're not really addressing in a big way the biggest holes in the roster. Their outfielders this year have hit 186 collectively. I mean, just horrible production from the outfield. Horrendous. And they got one outfielder who is a poor defender in Josh Naylor, who's not really that impactful of a hitter. I mean, he could be good, but they keep trading away these stars and star pitchers, and they're not addressing their biggest area of need. They're not going for it, but the talent is there. If they wouldn't have traded away all these guys, this could be a team that had Kluber, Bauer, Clevenger, and, Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor. I mean, this could be an incredible team, but instead, I don't quite understand the Indian strategy, and I have them as a loser at this year's trade deadline. A few other teams I want to go through here as losers in my eyes. The New York Yankees, and we're back to the inaction theme here. No contender, perhaps maybe the Rays, but I would say no contender is more thoroughly banged up throughout the roster than the Yankees, who have slipped into second place in the American League East. Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Gleyber Torres, James Paxton, and Zach Britton are among the several key players that are sidelined for them. Some of the injuries are pretty concerning. They could be long-term things. They could be reoccurring things even when the player comes back. and the team made absolutely zero moves at the trade deadline. As I mentioned earlier, General Manager Brian Cashman insisting there were no sensible offers. And the Yankees are far from doomed, to be very clear. They still have one of the best rosters in the American League. But we're approaching the final stretch now. And the team is without great starting pitching depth behind Garrett Cole. They're counting on continued production from Brett Gardner and relying on the likes of Jordy Mercer and Tyler Wade with a career average in the majors of 195 at shortstop. And there's still plenty of talent. Luke Voigt's doing incredible things. Giovanni Urshela, underrated at third. They've got talented hitters and pitchers, but I'm puzzled that the Yankees of all teams, in this, they've got Garrett Cole. They're going for it. Here we go. I'm surprised that they're leaving so much to chance. And we could see a scenario in which some of the players that are down right now for them come back and are healthy and are productive, and it just works out fine. And even if they don't, they could still succeed. But I just am puzzled that the Yankees are leaving so much to chance and didn't act more at the deadline. Didn't act at all at the deadline. A couple other ones. These are really kind of simple explanations. The Braves and the Brewers are two other losers for me at the trade deadline. The Braves had some obvious holes that they just didn't fill. I think some of the most obvious holes on their rosters of any contender. Third base wasn't a real area of concern. Apparently they had reached out to the Mariners about Kyle Seager, but that didn't go anywhere. The bigger gaping hole on that roster is in the starting rotation. Max Fried is an NL Cy Young candidate. We'll talk about him later. And they added lefty Tommy Milone from the Orioles, but that was not a really impactful move, and he didn't even make it out of the third inning in his first start. There's real concern that they don't really have any reliable starters right now behind Max Fried. That's not really an exaggeration. I mean, Josh Tomlin has been pretty good, okay, but they have real problems in that rotation, and they did not address them. And I can see that being a real concern. I think they're going to make the playoffs, but I can see that being a real concern come October. Final loser I want to mention is the Milwaukee Brewers. They entered play yesterday, just one game back of the Cardinals for the second spot in the NL Central, and a half game ahead of the Reds, who we talked about making some impactful moves. They entered yesterday a half game ahead of the Reds in the division standings, but they took a very different approach than Cincinnati. Instead of adding to an offense which has the worst batting average of any team in baseball and is scoring the second fewest runs per game in the majors, or adding to a rotation that has major questions behind Brandon Woodruff, the team, as mentioned, they shipped reliever David Phelps to Philadelphia, and that is it. The Brewers are easily within striking distance of a playoff spot, not just a wild card, but the second spot in the NL Central, and showed no urgency in improving their roster heading into the final month of the season. That, I feel like, can't be described in any other way than as a failure on the part of their team. And not, when I say failure, I don't mean, an utter failure. They're a horrible organization, to be clear, but I feel like as far as the trade deadline went, that was a miss for the Brewers in a big way. So those are my 5 winners and 5 losers. Again, to recap, the biggest winners, Padres and Blue Jays in my eyes. The biggest losers, Rangers, and then I would say Indians, but also the Yankees, a loser as well in my eyes. A couple other teams I want to mention here before we end this segment. As I mentioned, I found that exercise of writing that story and these teams that we just talked about now as being a good one in pretty much going over the majority of the impactful trades that we saw in the last couple days. But there were a couple others I just want to hit on briefly here. The Marlins took a really interesting approach. I mentioned that they traded Jonathan Villar, the speedster, to Toronto, but they weren't just selling because they added the most impactful bat that was traded. Starling Marte was acquired from the Arizona Diamondbacks. I mean, this is the biggest name. This is the biggest name we've seen in a trade involving the Marlins that's actually going to the Marlins in years. Starling Marte, a big bat, a good defender with the Diamondbacks, longtime Pittsburgh Pirate, traded to Miami. So the Marlins both selling and buying yesterday. It was an interesting approach. They've got a player we'll talk about who could take over for VR at second base that makes some sense for why they traded VR. But Overall, though, this is an impactful ad in adding Starling Marte from the Diamondbacks. So the Marlins, a team that right now in a playoff spot, looks like they're going for it. And wouldn't that be something to see the Marlins competing in the postseason in 2020? It would be very on brand for 2020. A couple other developments I want to mention here before we end this segment. The Mets, we touched on the Rangers a bit. The Mets acquired Todd Frazier and Robinson Chirinos from the Rangers, and they also got reliever Miguel Castro from Baltimore. None of those are huge needle movers, but they could be impactful moves for the Mets. Todd Frazier's having a good year. Wilson Ramos has struggled, so adding Chirinos makes some sense there for behind the plate for the Mets. The Cubs made a couple of impactful moves. When I say impactful, I don't mean really impactful. They made some smaller moves, which I've seen some people group together in calling the Cubs a winner. They certainly improved their roster. Cameron Maybin was acquired from the veteran outfielder from the Tigers, Josh Osich, the left-hander from Boston, and Andrew Chafin, the left-hander from Arizona, as well as a few days back, designated hitter Jose Martinez from the Rays. So these are clear upgrades for the Cubs roster. I don't see it being a huge needle mover for them, but clear upgrades for the Cubs. The Rockies also acquired outfielder Kevin Pillar from Boston, and reliever Michael Givens from Baltimore. Some notable moves, especially in the case of Givens, who's been really good. The Rockies need help at the back end of their bullpen. They're still competing very much for a playoff spot. Finally, a couple teams I also wanted to highlight as being quiet at the trade deadline, the Nationals. There had been some talk that they were still going for it, that they were going to be buyers. They didn't do anything, and that's probably for good reason. Probably the right call, because the Nationals it's just not happening. The Nationals are the defending world champions. They are at the bottom of the NL East. They are 12-20. It just doesn't look like it's happening for the Nationals this year. The Astros also were quiet at the deadline for the most part. They've dealt with a number of injuries this year, particularly in the bullpen, and they didn't address any of those. So we'll see how that plays out. The Dodgers apparently considered Lance Lynn, but that did not happen. They didn't really need a trade. It would have been certainly really impactful if they had acquired Lynn, but they didn't make a big move. They shipped Ross Stripling to Toronto. That was the only trade the Dodgers made ahead of the deadline. The Rays also didn't make any moves. They're also a really banged up team, particularly on the pitching side. They're still clearly in great shape. They're leading the AL East over the Yankees, one of the best teams in baseball this year. But I thought we might see something from them. And then the White Sox also didn't make any moves. I thought maybe they could be a team that added a relief arm, or maybe a starter of the caliber of Stripling or Ray or something like that. They didn't do that, but this is also a really talented team that I'm looking forward to seeing what they do moving forward. They're not, by any means in trouble because they didn't make a move. So just another couple teams I wanted to highlight there. So that is our trade deadline breakdown. For full analysis, though, go to 110sportsmedia.com. I've got a written piece up on the site now today with MLB trade deadline winners and losers. Padres go all in. Blue Jays make smart moves. Rangers miss an opportunity. That story up at 110sportsmedia.com. When we come back, we've got some more to get to here today on the show, a good bit to get to. When we come back, we will dive into some recent standouts. And this isn't a segment we usually do, but there's just a number of players I wanted to highlight that are doing incredible things right now. Some historic performances from Lucas Giolito, who we talked about last week, to Adam Wainwright, to Jacob deGrom, Shane Bieber, Max Fried, Juan Soto, and much more. That's coming up. And then we will dive into some quick news and notes, and then a rapid-fire edition of our Power Rankings Spotlight that we do every Tuesday. That is coming up next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases from 110 Sports, streaming live on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. I'm Chris Brown, and we, of course, went through some of the biggest winners and losers of the trade deadline. A lot to digest there, but we are going to go ahead and move on to our next topic of today's show, which is simply recent standouts, which is a very uncreative name of a segment, I acknowledge, but there were just a number of different players who are doing incredible things right now. Some who we haven't really discussed much this season or much in recent weeks, so I feel like it's important for us to discuss. So we're not going into our typical top four today, as you probably noticed, but we're going to talk a little bit about some recent standouts, and then we'll dive into our regular news and notes type of segment as well. So let's start with some recent standouts, and we're going to go through these pretty quickly here. First off, Lucas Giolito and Manny Machado were named the MLB Players of the Week for this past week. Giolito, of course, as we talked about, with the first no-hitter of 2020 last week. Manny Machado, the Padres' third baseman, hit .538 with 3 homers and a 1,500 OPS last week. Adam Wainwright, turning back the clock for the Cardinals, the veteran right-handed pitcher, turned 39 years old on Sunday. He is the oldest pitcher in the National League, and he went out and threw a complete game against the Indians, striking out 9 and walking 2. Only blemish was a 2-run home run by Tyler Naquin in the second inning. This was Wainwright's first complete game since 2016 and the 23rd of his career. Wainwright threw 122 pitches, the most of any pitcher this season. Again, he's 39 years old, the oldest pitcher in the National League. He lowered his season ERA to 2.65 in 34 innings. Also of note, that performance came with Yadier Molina behind the plate, of course, as he appeared in his 2,000th game as a Cardinal, the third most in franchise history. So really impressive stuff all the way around right there. Adam Wainwright, clearly still something left in the tank. A 2.65 ERA this season at age 39. Briefly want to discuss here 3 players who were tied for the MLB lead with 13 home runs entering today. That's Yankees first baseman Luke Voit, Fernando Tatis Jr., shortstop for the Padres, and DH for the Twins' Nelson Cruz. What a strange and magnificent trio of players that is. Voit just got to the 13-homer mark last night with a home run. Really great bat for the Yankees. One of the better first basemen in baseball right now, and just in general, I would say. As for the other 2, Tatis Jr. is 21 years old. Of course, Nelson Cruz is 40. MLB.com Sarah Langs noted that this is the first time in the modern era that we've ever had players that young and that old tied for the home run lead at one time. For Cruz specifically, Langs noted that he is the first 40-year-old with the share of the MLB home run lead since 1958. No 40-year-old has ever led Major League Baseball in home runs for a season, so that would be certainly something special if Nelson Cruz can accomplish that. Meanwhile, if Tatis Jr. leads baseball in home runs, he would be just the third 21-year-old to accomplish that feat. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple great starters now. First off, Jacob deGrom of the Mets. He took the loss last night, his first of the season after giving up 4 runs in 6 innings against Miami, but only one of those runs was an earned run, thanks to a Pete Alonso error. In fact, deGrom's performance was pretty darn good. 1 earned run, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts in 6 innings. ESPN's David Schoenfield noting that deGrom became the first player to induce at least 31 swings and misses in a game and lose since Pedro Martinez in May of 2000. 20 years. Meanwhile, Newsday's Tim Healy noted pregame that this was deGrom's 4th straight start in which he faced the Marlins. The last time a pitcher faced the same team in 4 consecutive starts was 1929. So that's 2020 for you. Shane Bieber, another player I want to mention right now, he has been the best pitcher in baseball this year, and it's not even close. Honestly, I'd say he's been the best player in baseball this season. Maybe Fernando Tatis Jr., but Shane Bieber has been just incredible this year. He was brilliant again last night, 9 strikeouts and 6 shutout innings against the Royals. He allowed just 1 hit, though he did walk 4. 25-year-old on the season, 6-0 with a 1.20 ERA, a 0.82 whip, 83 strikeouts to 13 walks over 52 and 2/3 innings. He leads baseball in strikeouts, ERA, and he's third in WHIP. ESPN Stats and Information tweeting yesterday that Bieber struck out the first batter of the fourth inning last night, gave him 82 strikeouts through his first 50 innings of the season, which is the most strikeouts by a starting pitcher through their first 50 innings ever. Ever in MLB history. No pitcher has ever had as many strikeouts as Shane Bieber through his first 50 innings of a season. I mean, that's how incredible he's been this year. I had him as my midseason, not only AL Cy Young, but MVP, and at this point, I certainly thinking that could continue if he can keep up anything like what he's been doing the rest of the season. More history last night for Max Fried of the Braves as well. He has put the team on his back in the absence of Mike Soroka, who's out after tearing his ACL. Fried pitched 5 innings, 2 earned runs yesterday. He moved to 6-0 on the season. Stats Inc., according to Stats Inc., Fried, he started 8 games this season. According to Stats Inc., the Braves have won all 8, and Fried has not allowed a home run in any of them. And he's become the first lefty to allow 0 homers through his first 8 starts, with his team winning all of them, since Babe Ruth in 1917. No other lefty has gone out there with his first 8 starts of a season. Teams won all of them. He's given up no home runs since Babe Ruth. That's how incredible Max Fried has been this year. So right now, that he's clearly an NL Cy Young contender, one of the front runners in that race. He's just been sensational for the Braves this season, so I wanted to highlight him. A few hitters I want to highlight here. The White Sox, Luis Robert. He is continuing to battle it out with center fielder Kyle Lewis of Seattle for the AL Rookie of the Year award. Robert homered last night, his 3rd home run in his last 4 games. He's now hitting about 300, 10 homers, 22 runs, 24 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, and over his last 15 games played, he has 18 RBI. I mean, he's doing incredible things right now. Of course, so is Kyle Lewis, who I still have as the front runner for the AL Rookie of the Year in my eyes. But Luis Robert doing incredible things at such a young age for the White Sox this season. Another star young outfielder I want to mention is Juan Soto. The 21-year-old is just unbelievably incredible. He's just been sensational this season. He homered twice last night. He brings his total to 11 home runs in 24 games this season. His OPS is over 1,200. It's easily the best in baseball. MLB.com's Sarah Lang's noting that Soto has 7 career multi-home run games now, which is tied for the second most in MLB history before turning 22. Only Mel Ott has more. So Juan Soto, this year, on a plate appearance basis, not in terms of cumulative numbers because he missed some time at the beginning of the season, but on an at-bat by at-bat basis, has been the best hitter in baseball, period, at age 21. Finally, I want to highlight Trey Turner of the Washington Nationals, who, this is a player I don't think we've mentioned on the show all season, but he's been incredible this season over his last 4 games in particular, last 4 games, he's had 3 hits, 5 hits, 3 hits, and 4 hits. He went 15 for 20 on the Nationals road trip to raise his average up to 377. He leads baseball in batting average. He's 4th in OPS. He's a speedster, but he only has 3 stolen bases. He has 7 home runs, 18 RBI, 28 runs scored. Trey Turner, a lot of this production has been of late, but he's been incredible this season. A very underrated one of the top shortstops in baseball. That's, Soto's teammate. That 1-2 punch in the Nationals lineup is something, but as we mentioned, it just doesn't look like it's happening for the Nationals. There's not enough talent on that roster besides Soto, Turner, Scherzer, Corbin, which, I mean, that's a pretty great core, but you got to have enough talent around him. No matter how great your core of your best 2, 3, 4 players is, you got to have some notable talent around them, and the Nationals just don't this season. So those are some players I wanted to highlight as recent standouts. It's just doing some really historic things. And this is a segment I may find a better name for it, but I think I might want to do it some moving forward just to kind of catch some performances, some runs, some streaks that players are on that I want to highlight. That might get forgotten in normal circumstances. So we may do some segments like this again moving forward just to highlight some incredible performances of late. So let's go ahead and move on here to some news and notes here. We'll go through these quickly, and then we'll come back with our power rankings spotlight. The series scheduled for this week between the A's and the Mariners has been postponed through tomorrow for precautionary reasons after a positive COVID-19 test from the A's organization over the weekend. There is good news, though. Multiple reports this morning confirming that all A's testing conducted yesterday has come back with negative results so far. Only one member of the organization has tested positive. The A's are set to resume play now in just a couple days and are reportedly returning to the Bay Area today. Major League Baseball has issued its punishments for a benches clearing incident between the Reds and the Cubs over the weekend. Cincinnati Reds manager David Bell and outfielder Jesse Winker were suspended for one game. They were also fined an undisclosed amount of money. The Reds' first baseman, Joey Votto, also received a fine, but not a suspension. Cubs coach Mike Borzello was handed a one-game suspension and fined. This all started after the Reds pitcher threw over Anthony Rizzo's head in the fourth inning. Fourth inning, both teams were warned. And then the bottom of the fourth inning, Cubs righty Adbert Alzolay almost hit Shogo Akiyama with a pitch, causing the benches to clear, and Bell, Votto, and Winker were all ejected. At 48 years old, Manny Ramirez still isn't ready to quit. The former 9-time Silver Slugger who played 19 seasons in MLB has signed a one-year deal with the Sydney Blue Sox of the Australian Baseball League, where he's expected to act as a player coach. Major League Baseball has informed its Players Association that it wants contending teams that play at home to quarantine in hotels rather than return to their homes during the final week of the regular season. This protocol change would lessen chances of players contracting COVID-19 heading into the postseason. In addition to a possible lockdown on the use of the bubble, players will be tested for COVID-19 every day during the playoffs, it is expected at this point. So baseball continuing to make plans for its postseason. It appears some neutral sites for those games, and also the league wanting players to take as many precautions and to potentially to potentially not go home to visit their families into their homes environments in the final week of the season if they're contenders. This is still going to the players. It needs approval, and all this according to the Athletics' Ken Rosenthal. The Yankees reinstated second baseman DJ LeMahieu from the 10-day injured list over the weekend. The 32-year-old was hitting .411 in 19 games before a left thumb sprain sidelined him for roughly 2 weeks. The Twins are going to activate Byron Buxton and Michael Pineda today. Josh Donaldson, the veteran third baseman, will be activated from the IL tomorrow. Meanwhile, Major League Baseball and its Players Association have reached an agreement to allow Marlins second baseman Isan Diaz to return for the remainder of the season, something that could have absolutely played a role in the team trading Jonathan Villar, which we talked about. The 24-year-old Diaz had opted out of the season at the beginning of August after the COVID-19 outbreak that affected the Marlins, but he had a change of heart, and he's now expected to take over as second base after the trade of Villar. A few more rapid-fire notes for you here. Tampa Bay starter Charlie Morton will return from the injured list to start tomorrow against the Yankees after dealing with right shoulder inflammation. The Indians recalled outfielder Oscar Mercado from their alternative training site, and with Mike Clevenger now gone, Zach Plesac will return to their Major League rotation tonight against the Royals. And that's a look at our news and notes for today. When we come back, we'll dive into our Power Rankings Spotlight, abbreviated edition for you today, given the circumstances and that we've talked so much about teams and where they stand right now. But we do have a couple teams I want to highlight for you in our Power Ranking Spotlight. That's coming up next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports, streaming on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for sticking around with us here today on the broadcast. We have a lot to get to you here today. Pardon me, here's some technical difficulties. Thanks for sticking around. We have one more segment to get to you today here on the broadcast, and that is our Power Rankings Spotlight. So we've already talked a lot about some of the items that I cover in my Power Ranking Spotlight, which comes out every week on the website every Monday, ranking all 30 teams. We already talked a lot about some of those items, and some of that information is already actually, that I wrote in that story is already a bit outdated because of the trade deadline and the additions that have been made and whatnot. So in this final couple of minutes here of the show, and we're going to go a little bit over given our late start today, I'm just going to go briefly through a couple of teams that I think deserve mention that we haven't talked a lot about today. A lot of the teams that are lower in the power rankings this week there's not much to say about them. They're sold off pieces, and we already talked about them, or they're just clearly not contenders, and there's not much to say about it. So we're going to highlight some teams that are generally in the upper portion of my power rankings this week, and we're going to start with some teams that I have trending down. The first one is the Washington Nationals, and we talked about the Nationals a little bit already. The defending world champions, they've dropped 8 of their last 11 games. They are 12 and 20 now. They lost 2 of 3 to the Red Sox over the weekend. They have won just one singular series all season. It is not a pretty picture for the Nationals right now. There's not a lot else to say. We talked about Juan Soto and Trey Turner. They're doing great things, but the Nationals are really struggling. It just does not look like their year. Another team that is trending down for me right now is the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs were 6th in my power rankings, and the Nationals were 16th. They went to 20th this past week. The Cubs, meanwhile, they were 6th last week. They dropped to 10th in my power rankings this week, and maybe that's a little bit of an extreme drop in the power rankings. It was more about teams jumping them than them falling back. They haven't been able to quite get back to their early season winning ways. They've lost 4 of their last 6 games, but they've still got a pretty good hold on the NL Central lead right now. And there have been some interesting developments. Yu Darvish continuing to make his case for the NL Cy Young Award. He's 6-1 with a 1.47 ERA. A couple days ago, Ian Happ, Kyle Schwarber, and Jason Hayward became the first trio of starting outfielders to each hit multiple home runs in a game ever in MLB history. The team, as we mentioned, also added Jose Martinez, and they've got about a 2/3, about 70% chance now, last I looked, of winning the NL Central according to Fangraphs. So they're still in good shape, but I did want to note their recent struggles to some degree. The Yankees, we've talked about the Yankees. I talked about them and mentioning them as a loser in the trade deadline. They fell in my power rankings this week from 3rd all the way down to 9th, and that may be also a little bit extreme. They could get back up there a couple spots at least in this upcoming week's edition of the Power Rankings. They had won 3 in a row before their loss last night, but before that, they had lost 7 games in a row. So, and they'd fallen out of the top spot in the AL East. The Rays taking that spot. They're really banged up. We've talked about the Yankees already, but just want to highlight their struggles a little bit there. They're coming back down. I don't want to say coming back down to earth, but because they're a great team. But some recent struggles for the Yankees that certainly need to be acknowledged there. The Twins fell a couple of spots from 5th to 7th. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline. It's a team we didn't mention, but they didn't do much at the trade deadline. They have lost 6 games in a row after being swept, including being swept by the Tigers over this past weekend. So they trail now both the Indians and the White Sox in the AL Central. The Twins do, so they certainly hit a rough patch. This is a team I believe in. They were my pick to win the AL title. I don't know, I'm feeling super confident about that, but they're certainly a great team, and I'm not I'm not jumping ship on the Twins by any means. They're still a really good team that I'm optimistic about. A few teams that are trending up here I want to mention to end the broadcast. The Detroit Tigers, they were 25th in last week's power rankings. They are now up to 21st this week. They're 16-16. They're 500. They're still hanging around. They're still technically in the playoff picture right now. They're coming off a highly improbable sweep, as we mentioned, of the Twins. They've won 5 in a row. They're back to 500. They won 3 consecutive series for the first time in 2 years, and they're not that far out of a playoff spot. I don't see them as a contender. I really don't. But you have to give them credit for what they've done. And, at this point in the season, we're late enough that a team that's around the playoff picture, any team that's close enough to the playoff picture could conceivably get in with a good run here. And the Tigers, no exception to that, even though I'm not expecting it by any means. Another team I want to highlight that's on the rise is the Philadelphia Phillies. We talked about the Phillies in the additions that they made to the back end of their bullpen. I just want to highlight that Joe Girardi's club has now won 6 of its last 7 games. They're tied for second in the NL East standings. Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler both pitching well. As I mentioned, JT Realmuto, Bryce Harper, both doing incredible things at the plate. They made those reliever additions. This is a team I'm going to be having my eyes on here, keeping my eyes on the next week or so of this season. Another team that I have trending up is the Houston Astros, who, despite my criticism of them not making any deals at the deadline, this is a team I have to give credit for what they've done. They've won 4 of their last 5 games, including 2 against the A's before a postponement there. Kyle Tucker, the young outfielder, doing incredible things for the Astros right now. With the A's incredible run slowing down just a little bit, the Astros have cut the Oakland's lead in the AL West down to just a couple games. Something to watch down the stretch. The Astros are certainly finding their way, continuing to show that they found their way after a rough start to the season. Final team I want to highlight trending up is the Chicago White Sox. 8th last week, 4th this week in the power rankings. They are 22-13. They just can't stop winning. They've won 12 of their last 14 games. Luis Robert, we mentioned, doing incredible things. Tim Anderson leads the American League in batting average. Lucas Giolito coming off a no-hitter. And the team just broke their previous franchise records for the most home runs hit in a single calendar month. This White Sox team, like the Padres, are 2 of my favorite to watch right now. There's a lot of energy, a lot of talent on that roster, and they just can't stop winning. 12 of their last 14, as I mentioned, the White Sox doing incredible things this year. Briefly, just want to tell you my top 3. At the top is the Dodgers. No surprise in any sense there. Their run differential is plus 90. Clayton Kershaw's ERA is 1.80. Mookie Betts is hitting. Cody Bellinger's back on track. And the team just broke the NL record for the most home runs hit in a single calendar month. Dodgers are incredible. Best team in baseball, no doubt about it. The Tampa Bay Rays remain 2 in the second spot for me. The injuries keep piling up, but they've won 18 of their last 21 games. 18 of their last 21 games, the Rays have won. Brandon Lau at second base just keeps raking. Only change in my top 3 is in that 3rd spot. Oakland A's up to 3. I dropped I believe it was the Cubs. I dropped the Yankees from 3rd, of course, down to 9th. So the White Sox, the A's are in that 3rd spot, despite a little bit of a rough patch recently. They're still one of the hottest teams in the American League, though, overall, looking at the past couple of weeks. So that's my top 3, and that's our Power Rankings Spotlight for this Tuesday, September 1st. And that is our show for this Tuesday, September 1st, 2020. Thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties today and our late start, and thanks for joining us on Around the Bases here on this Tuesday. A reminder for you, a couple reminders as we head out. Our 110 Sports live coverage continues tomorrow with the J-Mole Show with Josh Molnix at 11 a.m. Eastern, surely talking NBA playoffs and plenty to discuss there. And then Touchline Talk with Josh Doring on Thursday at 11 Eastern. Then we're back with you here on Around the Bases Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll see what developments happen in the next couple days. Maybe some more impact of trades is known. We have these teams playing their first games with their new teams. Also anticipating probably looking at the playoff picture right now. It's not something we've discussed a lot. Of course, we've been noting it along the way, but I think one thing I'm probably going to have on Thursday's show is a more in-depth look at the playoff picture in each league, in each division, where things stand right now, what teams we can kind of say, okay, yeah, 1% or less chance of making the playoffs. We don't have to even really think about them in regard to that anymore. So the dust settling on the trade deadline, That's something I think we'll do on Thursday, and we'll, of course, discuss the latest headlines and much more. Make sure to go to 110sportsmedia.com for all of our latest written content. Subscribe to the 110 Sports newsletter there on the homepage, right side of the homepage. And that'll do it for today's show. Thanks for watching, as always. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, a great Wednesday as well, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.